Eowig rode his chestnut mare down the forest path, his mind awash in recent revelations. Mattathios had told him much of the nature of reality and the existence of the other elf races. It all went against what the elven lords had explained to him, but how could he know this Magistrati spoke any truth? Much of what he had said made little sense. The elf lord said Sol Invicta was the only god, that his light was all we could ever need. It seemed true enough. Without the sun, what life could there be? Without its warmth, there would only be the bitter cold. Without its gifts of fertility, there could be no birth. But as a hunter and a woodsman, Eilvig knew many forms of life preferred the nighttime. By the light of the moon, many big cats hunted, owls scanned the darkened forest, and all manner of prey species scurried about in the cover of darkness. Mattathios had said his people were called the Lu Navite. He had said they were the opposite side of the coin from the elven lords, or what he termed the Sun Elves. He said the Sun Elves were the children of light and order, and that the Lunavitae were the children of darkness and chaos. This just confused Elvig more. Darkness and chaos were to be reviled. Why would this night elf seek to gain his trust by admitting his people are evil? But that, like many things Mattathios had said, would need to be pondered later. Mattathios had said that many would consider him evil, and that he needed to hide his face and skin if he was to be accepted among the humans. Eilvig could not have agreed more. The last thing he needed was for people to know he had brought a loathsome night elf to town. The elf lords would probably send in paladins to cleanse the whole area if they caught word of his presence. So Eilvig carved up a simple wooden mask and gave Mattathios robes and a hooded cloak and a pair of old leather gloves so that he could conceal his identity. For now, Eilvig remained confused and conflicted about this so-called Lunavite, but he did see him control and use holy light magic, so he must be blessed by Sol Invicta at the very least. The Magistrati had said that he was torn between two callings. He had to stay and tend to the sick and the wounded of the village, but also needed to collect and repair his armor. Eilvig was forced to leave the armor in the forest when he had brought Mattathios' unconscious body back to town. He had stuffed much of the armor up inside the brigandine and then wrapped it all in the night elf's cloak before putting it in a shallow grave and covering it with brush before a large mossy stone near the forbidden part of the forest. Eilvig had then introduced Mattathios to the town healer and promised to bring back his armor for him. The town healer, Healdrin, was suspicious and full of questions at first. Eilvig had told him that Mattathios was an elf lord who suffered grievous burns across his entire body and had dedicated his life to being a traveling healer thereafter. Heldran had not believed until Mattathios had laid hands on one of his patients, filled the room with a warm light, and cured the woman's ailment almost instantly. With that, Heldran had forgot all doubts and started telling Mattathios all those in need of healing. With this, Eilvig saddled his horse and a pack mule and set out to retrieve the Magistrati's armor. He'd been out hunting for 3 days when he'd come across Mattathios the first time, but he figured it would take half that time to get there intentionally and with no distractions. Spring was just around the corner, and these days were getting longer and warmer. But just now, in the early morning of the second day, it was still too cold for many animals to be wandering about. The forest was quiet, calm, and peaceful. Eilvig's mind then wandered back to the creature that had started him off on the journey. He had told Mattathios about the tall, furry creature with cat eyes that rode a great elk that had saved them both. Mattathios' eyes had gone wide and excitement had filled his voice. We Lunavite had lost contact with the surface world when we were driven into our new home in the underground caverns. But all our stories say that once all 4 races of elf lived together in harmony. All had come from a single species, but diversified as they spread across the land. The Lunavite had gone west, following the setting sun into the nightlands. The High Elves had gone east, to the land of the rising sun. The Malier had gone to the great tundra of the north, and the Dryadier had gone south to the land of dense jungle. He said that this creature matched the description of a nature-loving Dryadier, just as the Lunavite were opposite sides of a coin from the High Elves, the Driadii, or Wood Elves, were the reverse side of the coin from the Malii, the Wild Elves. Mattathios had said that all other races of elf were subjugated by the High Elves long ago, after the unified Elven Empire had collapsed. He said the Driadii were in tune with the aspect of supportive order, believing it was their goal to support all non-sentient life in the world, and they made their homes in where most diversity of life flourished, like old-growth forests and jungles. Eilvig pondered this as his horse steadily plodded down the well-worn trail. If this was true, then his childhood savior could also come to be his town's savior. The thing rode a great elk, and if what Mattathios said is true, then it's a steward of nature. Maybe it could help explain why the game was leaving the forest, and how best to get them to return. It was common for game to be scarce in winter, true, but these past few years had been very lean for Adelber. The Driadii had helped him twice already. Perhaps he would show up again. And then he will ask for something costly in return, thought Eilvig. He had no experience with these types of elves, but found it hard to believe they would freely offer aid without some trade-off. He had worked alongside the Sun Elves, and if he knew anything about them, it was they never gave anything freely. Each morsel they deemed fit to give humanity was paid for in blood, sweat, tears, taxes, and sacrifice. As his mind wandered, his horse stayed true to the path. It was now close to midday, and Eilvig could tell he was getting close to the forbidden zone of the forest. He had hidden armor close to the forbidden zone by that great moss-covered stone. He was just nervous to get close to that haunted place again. He had seen the kind of powers Mattathios had, and he would have been killed without help. What chance could I stand then? He mused. With this in mind, Eilvig decided to stop there for an hour to eat and rest up. He found a comfy space between two trees, tied off his horse and mule, and sat with his back up against one tree with his feet up on the trunk of the other. He ate some of his stale bread with a spread of pemmican, a preserved meat and vegetable paste they stockpiled as winter rations. It was a tough and bland meal, but he had suffered through worse. After he decided he would close his eyes, just a quick minute to relax. It should be safe enough in the middle of the day. Once his eyes closed, Eilvig was fast asleep. In his dream, he saw the wood elf riding its massive stag. He was standing by the huge, moss-covered stone that Eilvig had buried the armor under. The Driadii pointed to the armor and then to the sky. Eilvig felt that the elf was telling him to get the armor while the sun is high. The wraiths don't wander as far during the day. The dream then shifted. 4 nights passed in an instant, and now they were in a meadow, close to Adelber, that Eilvig knew well. Then he noticed something in the far distance near the tree line. A huge great elk came into the meadow and started grazing peacefully. The Driadii walked Eilvig up to the elk, putting his finger just behind the elk's shoulder blade. Eilvig was overcome with emotions. He felt the sadness of the elf, but also he felt purpose. He knew then the Driadii was telling him where to hit the elk with an arrow for a quick and nearly painless death. He was offering this as a sacrifice to Eilvig. The Driadii then touched Eilvig on the forehead, and he woke up, startled to find himself a horse, and on the path, moving closer to that great mossy stone.